Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The Daily Mail has exposed the lefty lawyers who are enabling and exacerbating the Channel migrant crisis. This comes just days after the illegal migration bill reached royal assent, and yet the democratic will of the British people, executed by His Majesty's government, continues to be obstructed through the abuse of the rule of law. The Prime Minister has condemned the dodgy dealers, but was met with a barrage of abuse from the Bar Council. Corporate culture and diversity, equity and inclusion shows true colours of its sinister underbelly. It was so-called inclusive policies spearheaded by Dame Alison Rose that led to the debanking of Nigel Farage, and indeed the inclusive policies of Unilever that have served to benefit the Russian army as its staff are set to be conscripted unopposed. Even Purcell won't wash this stain away. And has the Conservative government learned the lessons of the Uxbridge by-election, that the electorate is firmly sceptical of costly net zero policies? The signs are there and the sands seem to be slowly shifting, as Michael Gove has indicated a review of heat pump policies as well as changes in energy performance certificates. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a particularly incisive panel this evening, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the PR tycoon and former Labour councillor, Kevin Craig. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story tonight on GB News. Nigel Farage says the entire board of NatWest Group should resign and the banking industry needs a cultural change. That comes after Dame Alison Rose admitted she had discussed Farage's banking status with the exclusive Coutts Bank with a BBC journalist. That prompted her resignation as CEO of NatWest Group last night. She's also no longer a member of the Prime Minister's Business Council. She's also been relieved of her duties on the Energy Efficiency Task Force, as well as the Net Zero Council. The former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, told Nigel Farage earlier it was right for her to go.
I was surprised at the statement last night, as you were, when essentially the chairman said she did something very wrong, but we fully support her. In fact, as you pointed out, what she did was the worst thing pretty much a banker can do, apart from run off with the funds yourself. To breach client-customer confidentiality in that way is an absolute no-no. And it was very surprising, having admitted that she did that.
The Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey says he's grateful to the jury and he feels humbled after being found not guilty of sexually assaulting 4 men. Appearing outside Southwark Crown Court today, Kevin Spacey addressed the media following the verdict. The Crown Prosecution Service saying they respected the decision of the court. The 64-year-old Oscar-winning actor had tears in his eyes as he said a jury had cleared him of all charges. The Prime Minister was met with jeers and heckling today as he defended the government's response to the infected blood scandal. While giving evidence to the infected blood inquiry, Rishi Sunak said he didn't personally see a letter in 2020 preparing for the possibility of paying compensation to victims. A consultation on train ticket office closures, which was due to end today, has been extended to the 1st of September now. Train operators unveiled proposals early this month for multiple closures of offices after the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, urged them to cut costs. The plans are being criticised by groups representing passengers and the RMT. And the sad news we've learnt in the last hour, the singer Sinead O'Connor has died at the age of 56.
It's been 7 hours and 50 days.
Sinead O'Connor became a worldwide sensation in 1990 with her version of Nothing Compares to You, which we heard just then. Originally written and sung by Prince, and it was declared the world's #1 single of the year at the Billboard Music Awards. The Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, has paid tribute to her, saying her music was loved around the world and her talent was unmatched and beyond compare. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News.
A Daily Mail investigation has found that some immigration lawyers in the United Kingdom have been aiding illegal migrants to manipulate the asylum system. An undercover Mail investigator posed as an economic migrant who arrived on a small boat, recorded his meetings with the lawyers around the country as he was pushed to lie about being suicidal, sexually tortured and enslaved to help his asylum application. Listen to this.
You can say that the Indian government accused you of pro-Khalistani. You were taken to custody, arrested, and you were ill-treated, tortured, sexually tortured, were frustrated, you wanted to commit suicide, Atmahatyam.
You need to establish that he fled from his country due to fear to his life on the basis of political opinion, religious matter, caste, race, or in a particular social group. These are the 5 ingredients of asylum.
He entered illegally in this country. So there's a story आई ना तेरे ज़हन च
कोई भी आपको बस काम करवाएगा है
नहीं ये तो यार कहेगा उन्होंने तेनों I'll make something up, and bring it to me and give it to you, and you will do the rest. Yes.
I will make something up. You heard it. What an extraordinary thing to say, preparing a witness to try and get something to which he isn't entitled. The law firm has been charging each illegal migrant £10,000 for fabricating evidence to go towards an asylum application that would grant refugee status to remain in this country. The story comes just 5 days after the Illegal Migration Act was given royal assent. It bans and returns anyone who comes into the UK through illegal routes other than in truly exceptional circumstances, which are just the ones being pushed forward by these dodgy lawyers. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, tweeted as a result. This is what we're up against. The Labour Party, a subset of lawyers, criminal gangs, they're all on the same side, propping up a system of exploitation that profits from getting people to the UK illegally. I have a plan to stop it. Bold and accurate and true words, but they prompted outrage from the usual suspects. The Bar Council Vice Chairman, Sam Townend, KC, King's Counsel, learned in the law, said this damaging rhetoric undermines the rule of law, trust in lawyers and confidence in the UK legal system and is to be deplored. High-minded stuff. But it's not the Prime Minister who's undermined trust in lawyers, it's the lawyers themselves who undermine that trust. And the Bar Council makes it even worse. How can you trust a Bar Council that defends lawyers who are dealing in dodgy practices and persuading people to enhance their applications so they have a better chance of getting something to which they are not entitled? Won't surprise you to know Mr Townend is a former Labour London councillor and stood as Labour MP twice unsuccessfully. The Bar Council is another organisation caught up in the woke culture that has so damaged NatWest. Just look at its website, which reveals the Bar Council is offering, you guessed it, equality and diversity courses, the sort of thing I tried to stop when I was in ministerial office. It introduced induction to diversity and equality, a 90-minute in-person course to help raise your diversity awareness. But for those of you who are uber-diverse and have already checked Yo Privilege, fear not. There's an advanced equality and diversity course too. This time it's a full 2 hours to help understand the role of equality and diversity in good chambers management. But what we actually want is people following the law and not trying to cheat the government by telling their clients what to say. So the point is clear that the Bar Council, which purports to be an apolitical representative body, like other supposedly apolitical representative bodies, has become dominated by PC bureaucratic groupthink. And instead of looking at this story for what it is, understanding the culprits, working out what's gone wrong, the dodgy lawyers exploiting people, vulnerable people who don't have huge amounts of money, undermining our laws, what's it done? It's blamed the Prime Minister for pointing out the facts. Humbug. Woke culture strikes again. But of course, I want to know your thoughts. Don't forget to let me know what you think, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm now joined by a great friend of our programme, our favourite lefty lawyer, Shoaib Khan. Shoaib, thank you for joining me once again. Surely we should be supporting the Daily Mail on this, and lawyers should not be preparing witnesses to say things that aren't true.
Well, yes, I mean, of course they shouldn't be. I don't think there's any doubt about that. What I think we do have an issue with, well, firstly, I mean, you know, just about your attack or your criticism of the Bar Council just then, you know, saying they're defending dodgy lawyers. I don't think the statement is. That's not what they said. What the Bar Council has said is that the Prime Minister personally tweeting and jumping into this, you know, there's been no inquiry, no investigation, we know nothing other than a Daily Mail front page. And for the Prime Minister himself to think, you know, this is what he needs to be prioritising, I think that's what you know, that's the tragedy. And that's what needs to be, as the Bar Council said, deplored. But other than that, in terms of investigating any dodgy or dishonest professionals in any field, of course, I mean, I think we need to be behind that. And if there's any way we can help, I think we all should.
But to come back to the Bar Council and its intervention, surely it should be defending the Prime Minister, who is quite right to have said what he said, that there's a system of exploitation that profits from getting people into the UK illegally. And the lawyers exposed by the Daily Mail are in exactly that category. They are exploiting the system. They're getting tons of money from it to get people in illegally. And the Prime Minister must be right to expose that. And the Bar Council is the one jumping on the bandwagon to say that the Prime Minister is undermining the rule of law when he's not. He's maintaining the rule of law, surely.
I'm not sure whether the bandwagon is the one attacking lawyers nowadays, or in fact defending them. So yeah, I mean, I think it's the Prime Minister jumping on the Daily Mail bandwagon. Of course it is. But yes, in terms of your point, of course, that's the thing. I mean, like I said, you know, these people need to be investigated. And if that's the case, you know, we've come up with, the Daily Mail, I don't know how long it is. Obviously, we've seen more lawyers exposed today. So I don't know if it's an ongoing thing. We'll see even more. But, you know, I mean, in terms of the number of solicitors and barristers in the country, it's obviously just a handful. You know, just with MPs, we have far fewer MPs and a much higher number of MPs actually being investigated for wrongdoing, even criminality. You know, doctors, lawyers, teachers, all sorts. So journalists, I mean, you know, TV presenters and so on, you know, of many of whom there are far fewer numbers. So yes, we've seen these 5 or 8 lawyers. Of course, they need to be investigated.
Look, I think for once we're broadly in agreement that there are good lawyers and there are bad lawyers. There are brilliant lawyers and they're very important to the rule of law. But that when an expose of this kind has been made, surely the Bar Council should be saying what you've been saying, and you've been saying very reasonably, that there should be an investigation, this should be looked at, not that the Prime Minister is wrong to be concerned about it. It's the attack on the Prime Minister seems to me to be utterly unsuitable in this context.
I think it's the Prime Minister jumping in that's unsuitable. I mean, it's clearly premature, especially for the Prime Minister, considering that position. You know, even later, even if 4, 5, 8 lawyers are found guilty, even then, is it something the Prime Minister should personally be involved with? I'm not too sure. But to jump in at this stage, just on the back of one Daily Mail front page, I think clearly it's premature. He knows nothing, we know nothing. And for him to have announced his verdict, surely that's wrong. I don't think that's... I mean, I agree with the Bar Council. It does jeopardise and threaten the rule of law.
Well, look, thank you very much, Shoaib. You must come into the studio one day and we must have the conversation face-to-face and we may get more time. But I'm now joined by Kevin Saunders, the former Chief Immigration Officer for UK Border Force. thank you very much for coming on. Do you find that this is the type of obstruction that is making life so difficult for Border Force to do its job successfully, that lawyers are deliberately trying to get round the system?
Oh, yes. Lawyers have been trying to get around the system since day one with vexatious claims after their clients have been refused. Fortunately, the Home Secretary in her new legislation hinted that now you can't keep making further claims. It's one claim and that's it. And certainly the new legislation has been really helpful in that anybody who arrives in an illegal method, i.e. they come on a boat, can't claim anyway. So that is going to be a big, big bonus. I mean, to a certain extent, the government have got themselves to blame, or governments have got themselves to blame, because immigration lawyers en masse actually started to make oodles of money back in the late 90s when we were dealing with mass immigration through into the UK through backs of lorries and what have you. And that is an industry of its own, really. So the new systems that have come in the new Act have been will be really, really helpful in stopping some of this.
And it's really important, isn't it? Because if you set up any system, there will be a certain number of people who will abuse it, and there will be people who will make money out of abusing it. But you equally want to help the people who are genuine refugees and have been tortured before they've come here. And that actually the really sort of wicked thing about people who've been exposed by the Daily Mail is that they make it harder and less likely that people who have really suffered will be able to get into this country.
Yes, you're quite right, because what's going to happen now is that people are not going to have, they're not going to regard the lawyers, as any lawyers in the immigration industry, as being truthful. So a few dishonest lawyers have really presented a problem for all the others, and that is a problem. But from what the Daily Mail has said, it's not just one or two. I understand at least a dozen firms are being investigated. And as you said at the beginning, the real problem is that they can't be prosecuted. The only sanction that we seem to have is for the Bar Council to strike them off.
Well, the Bar Council has already judged the matter by saying that it's on the side of the dodgy lawyers and against the Prime Minister. I mean, I think the criticism of the Prime Minister is absolutely monstrous.
Well, it is. I mean, the Prime Minister has only said what's going on, and we know that it's going on. We now have, evidence that it's going on. We've got that lovely recording that the Daily Mail did, first class, spot on.
I think the Daily Mail's done a great public service to the country at large to show what's going wrong and actually to help people support the Border Force in doing the work that it needs to do. Thank you, Kevin. Don't forget to let me know what you think, mailmog@gbnews.com. And coming up, we'll be hearing from someone who worked at the institution at the centre of a national scandal, Coots & Co. Plus, is the government about to shift towards a sensible energy policy? That'll be the day.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Nicola, if a lawyer is coaching someone to lie, should he not be struck off as a lawyer? I think that's a very fair point. Ian, the story about immigration lawyers undermines trust in the law. I think the lawyers have done that pretty effectively themselves. And Trevor, the Bar Council should disbar those, or the government should stop them practising. Well, today, NatWest executives might hope they've seen the peak of the pressure from the Farage debanking scandal. Debanking is such an ugly word, now entering our lexicon. Indeed, it's been reported that shareholders have heaped pressure onto the bank's chairman, Sir Howard Davis, to resign, as the firm's shares have declined as much as 4.1%, which is about £850 million taken off the value of NatWest. When you work that out to you as the owner, as the taxpayer, owning 39%, taxpayers lost about £325 million today because of the board's bungling. Nigel Farage has called for the entire board to resign, and from the outside one can only assume the firm is in a state of crisis. But the real question is, how did it get to this point for one of the big 5 banks of the UK? Well, who better to have with me than the director of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, and a former Coutts employee, Oliver Lewis, who rather ironically left Coutts to write his book about George Orwell, the Orwell Tour. Well, Oliver, you moved from an Orwellian organisation to write about Orwell. Which got you closer to Orwell?
Well, I wouldn't have said Coutts was Orwellian then. I mean, I left in 2015, and Coutts at that time really was still rather civilised. Alison Rose had just been appointed as the head of the Wealth Division. There was a lot of internal restructuring. In a professional capacity, I was actually quite impressed by her. She was diligent. She didn't show too much in conversations, and I was in meetings and conference calls with her and so on. And her professionalism and her scale of professionalism was such that I'm just amazed that this has happened. You know, one would think someone with her experience, when she joined the group in 1992, ingrained annually with all the proper rules of banking, that you don't breach the trust of your clients. It's a private bank. I mean, the clue's in the name. It's a private bank. I'm amazed she slipped up in this way, because she was really very good at the diplomacy, actually, and very difficult position she was in, because she there was basically a re-tiering of the Royal Bank of Scotland group, now of course NatWest, and she quite skillfully manoeuvred the personalities that were being exited.
So she's clearly a very impressive banker, but made a catastrophic error in gossiping about a client, which is the cardinal sin.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Toby, do you think it goes deeper than this? It goes to the wokeness of it, which we've just had a statement from the FCA, or an unnamed source, which, of course, Dame Alison was an unnamed source to start with, saying there's a real sense of disquiet that political pressure has led to a midnight exit for such an important banking CEO. They should have allowed due process. Now, what does the FCA think it's doing, briefing against the government on a deeply political story that has its roots in a breach of client confidentiality and woke behaviour at NatWest feeding down into Coutts?
Yeah, well, it's an odd statement for someone at the FCA to make, because we didn't need due process to play out, because Alison Rose confessed to the crime. She pleaded guilty, effectively. Yes, it was me that briefed the BBC's business editor and gossiped about one of our important clients. But in addition, what about the due process for poor old Nigel before they decided to throw him out of the bank? I mean, I'm pleased to hear the FCA cares about due process, because the Free Speech Union has submitted a complaint to the FCA about being debanked by PayPal last year. And one of our complaints is there was no due process. We were just told that our account had been closed. They ignored the requirement to give us 60 days' notice, gave us no explanation, no due process.
But isn't this at the heart of the problem? The FCA seems to be on the side, just from this quote, of debanking somebody and of the woke culture that has come in, of the if you don't share our culture, if you don't believe in equity, diversity and inclusion, you're not the sort of customer you want, that's all fine. The FCA is indicating that it's actually part of the problem rather than part of the solution.
Well, people have said that one of the reasons banks are so woke is because the FCA has been encouraging them to implement equity, diversity and inclusion policies and look at people like Farage to see whether they are causing the bank's reputational risk and so on. But I think the interesting thing about this story, Jacob, is that even though the original reason for debanking Nigel is because he was insufficiently woke, he was pro-Brexit, he was friends with Trump, friends with Djokovic, etc., no one connected with this story, either with Coutts or with NatWest or even the FCA, has actually come out and defended excluding people, kicking them out because they're insufficiently woke. It's as though the ideology, even though it's incredibly powerful, is paper thin. And when people are called upon to justify their authoritarian enforcement of that dogma, they don't know how to do that. They can't defend themselves.
But Oliver, this isn't the Coutts you knew. That the statement was, in the minutes that came out to Nigel, that they needed to get rid of him for reputational risk. Well, they've done quite a lot of harm to their reputation.
Well, I have to say, on those minutes, and I used to write minutes like that, so I used to minute some of these committees, and I would never have written anything. I mean, there are ways of phrasing things. So there's been a decline in governance standards in the production of minutes. Is an interesting reflection in the period that I've left. But I think Toby makes a very interesting point. Somebody commented on a Facebook post that I wrote today, and they said, I'm going to close my accounts with NatWest now because Nigel Farage is one of their customers. And he said, I just don't like him. And I pushed him on it. Has he committed a crime? Is he being convicted and tried and imprisoned? And of course, they go into a corner. There's no way out of that corner, and they often just get angry and sort of end up, off on a rant. But in terms of public policy, one thing that I find very interesting, there's a debate in political science about whether prisoners should be given the vote. It would be interesting to have a debate about whether perhaps if you're convicted and tried of a crime, whether you lose your bank account. I mean, is that something that, some of these groups would advocate for? If you commit a crime, we'll take your banking facilities away. Many ordinary people would think that would be a crazy thing to do. You want to give prisoners the vote, let alone depriving them of a bank account. And so when you test these arguments, as you say, they just fall apart, and they've sort of lost any sense of reason and the application of logic.
Well, that did happen, didn't it? Post-Brexit, people who were very strongly pro-Remain, who had thought that the Brexiteers were an amiable but eccentric bunch, suddenly looked at Boris and at Nigel and looked at them with loathing. And that carries on, and it's particularly strong in a lot of public institutions.
Yeah, and that's led people into a kind of derangement in which they don't think that people who they profoundly disagree with should enjoy the same rights as them, such as the right not to be debanked because the banker disapproves of your political views. The obvious flaw in that position, if they took a second to think about it, is that, well, if the political wind changes, that could happen to me. Absolutely. So it's in my interest long term to defend their rights because I'll also be defending my own. And one development today, a really encouraging development, I thought, was that Keir Starmer finally, it had to be dragged out of him, but finally condemned Coutts.
But that is really important,
Nigel.
because just think how much bigger the row would have been if the person debanked had been Jeremy Corbyn, with 38% of the company owned by a Tory government, or we'd had a Labour government that had debanked Nigel Farage, owning 38%, that everyone would then have thought the politicisation of banking. And perhaps this argument, to end on an optimistic note, means that we won't politicise banking and that banking will go back to being about actually making money, particularly important for NatWest to pay back some of the funds it had from the taxpayer.
Absolutely. I mean, to continue Toby's point, Francis Coppola on Newsnight was saying NatWest is a commercial organisation, it's a commercial decision, and that was the defence a lot of these people were using. It's all the commerciality. And I was like, well, there's 2 points here. First of all, NatWest, the entire banking system, is hardly truly commercial because it's always got the moral hazard, the backstop of the government bailing them out when we need to. And indeed, every citizen in the country has had to pay the cost of that bailout for the Royal Bank of Scotland, now NatWest. And the second thing, there's nothing more important than government being the guarantor of my rights, of your rights, of Francis Coppola's rights, of Jeremy Corbyn's rights. So, of course, this is a political issue. It's the duty of the government to act as a guarantor to our rights, which include, assuming you haven't broken the law, and as we know, Nigel hasn't, access to banking services.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you to Toby and Oliver. Coming up, what does Dame Alison Rose and Netflix and chilled non-dairy ice cream have in common? Plus, could the tide be turning on net zero?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to Thursday, for most of us it's going to be fairly cloudy, some outbreaks of rain too, but if you live in central and eastern parts it will feel fairly humid. So here's the situation as we end Wednesday. Got a huge area of low pressure really dominating proceedings and weather fronts bringing in bands of rain. And some of this rain will be quite heavy and persistent as we go through the course of the night, also bringing in quite a lot of mist and fog, especially across southern parts of the country. Also quite breezy too. The far northeast of Scotland here, actually, we will stay quite dry with some clear spells. So a little bit chilly here, temperatures falling down to around 5 or 6 degrees. But for the rest of us, a much milder night than of late. Temperatures not falling much lower than 15 or 16 degrees. So we do start the day quite mild, but also quite grey, murky and damp. But as the day goes on, we should see some improvements. It may well linger, though, down towards the very far south coast of England and also across Scotland. But elsewhere, some sunshine will develop, but that may well in turn trigger a few showers. But where we do see the sunniest skies, potentially over towards East Anglia and the Wash, we could see highs reaching here around 24 or 25 degrees. But elsewhere, if you do see the rain linger, it will feel a little bit disappointing for July. Then having a look at Friday and into the weekend, the weather is set to remain unsettled, a mix of sunshine and scattered showers, and all the time for most of us, temperatures remaining around average.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Naya says, my thoughts on this is that we need to remember that NatWest Coutts did all this to limit reputational damage. Well, it didn't do that very well, did it? Not on a genuine basis to protect freedom of speech. This was the progressive chessboard move that has unravelled. For those of you anxiously waiting for the answer to the question I posed before the break, what does Dame Alison Rose and Netflix and chilled non-dairy ice cream have in common? The answer is, of course, they melt under intense heat. It was this time yesterday when the chairman of NatWest, Sir Howard Davies, gave the routine full confidence in the then CEO, Dame Alison Rose. In politics, whenever the Prime Minister says he has full confidence in a minister, you know that that minister's period of office is drawing gently to a close. Anyway, before she stepped down from that role late last night in a, quote, mutual consent, unquote, agreement, it was only ever going to be a matter of hours rather than days. The diversity, equity and inclusion agenda driven by the former CEO proved itself to mean the opposite when it took banking facilities away from Nigel Farage. But NatWest is not the only institution infected by the PC hysteria. Unilever, which pretends to wear its heart on its sleeve, has just announced its latest results, where it used the cover of inflation to increase its profit margins well ahead of its cost increases. If this were not bad enough, as we've discussed before, Unilever's insistence on keeping its factories open in Russia, for the supposed reason that they don't want the business to be sold to the Russian state, goes against, surely, its masquerade as a moral, virtuous company. It was revealed, in addition to this, a couple of days ago, that Unilever will allow its 3,000 workers to be conscripted to the Russian military. So abandoning your business in Russia is bad, but letting the Russian state send your employees into a brutal and unprovoked war in Ukraine is fine. This, along with the fact that its bizarre peacenik ice cream brand, Ben & Jerry's, decided to blame the war in Ukraine on America, really shows the true colours of the institution. It profiteers and appeases the enemy. I'm joined now by my panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the PR tycoon and former Labour councillor, Kevin Craig. Kevin, Purcell can't wash this reputation whiter, can it?
No, and Jacob, I was stunned, actually. I noted this down, that Unilever's profits up 21% to £4.4 billion, profits out of Russia, 108 million euros, paying $50 million of taxes. I mean, that's not great, and you can't PR your way out of that.
No, and inevitably when prices go up, companies like Unilever have cost pressures, but their profit has gone up much more than inflation. So they're using inflation as a cover to rebuild profit margins.
Yeah, and for me, I'm almost more shocked by the profits of Unilever in a cost of living crisis than I am by the Russian stuff, because the Russian stuff, again, you know, is actually fiendishly complicated. But they, in my view, are making extortionate profits off the back of consumers, and I don't think it's great. And Ben and Jerry can preach all they want about the topic du jour, but it doesn't stick, does it?
Well, Kelvin, you and I are capitalists. I don't object to companies making money. That's what they're there for. That's why they invest and they pay people's pension funds and dividends and so on. But Unilever has been one of the leaders of the woke agenda, and that's where it really sticks in the craw. You can't have it both ways.
Well, I wouldn't have it anyway. They make things like Dove and I think Marmite and stuff like that. The truth about the matter is that they think that their brands are important to public life. Actually, just test this out. I don't really agree with Kevin completely about this. I am massively offended by their attitude in Russia. What they were looking for is somebody to buy the business off them, right? That was never going to happen. Putin would have made quite clear, we are not selling, we are going to take this business. They should have done what other major companies have done in Russia and simply said, you're right, we don't want to trade with you. There you are.
Because almost every other major company has stopped trading with Russia, has closed down its shops, its factories, or has allowed them to be confiscated by the Russian state. Unilever is an outlier on
I mean, what they said, chaps, sorry, just to come in on this specifically, their argument is that, you know, a lot of their products are the day-to-day essentials, so, you know, pulling those out makes life harder. I mean, I do agree with you, you know, being seen to in some way prop up the Russian regime is terrible, but you know, their line is more complicated.
But when a country has gone to war against a friendly nation, surely, as a matter of British foreign policy, it's why we've applied sanctions. We want to make life harder in Russia so that the Russian people don't support the war.
Yeah, well, it's not consistent with the fact that, you know, we've stopped companies, you know, trading in Russia, and, you know, you can only...
But why doesn't... I mean, I admire Rishi, basically, NatWest, change your mind, boom, she's gone. Why doesn't he just call in? It's an Anglo-Dutch company. Call in the CEO saying, either you stop doing this or boom, you're gone. We can do this kind of thing. It's powerful. I recognise that. But honestly, we either believe in the future of Ukraine or will we fighting about, do we believe in the future of Poland?
OK, I completely agree with that. But the government has to act within the rule of law, and it owned 38% on our behalf of NatWest.
They did.
Therefore had a stand.
All right, well, let's just put it. Let's just put it to the CEO. We want you to stop this, and then see what they say. What is remarkable is when a Prime Minister or a Chancellor finally says, it's amazing how many times things change.
Kelvin's right, there's soft power, you know, and, I mean, I've been amazed because, in my view, the government acts so slowly on so many issues of the day, and to see the speed with which they've actually got stuck in on the NatWest thing is I think they saw a good opportunity to look effective. But the non-partisan point is that Kelvin is right. Governments have soft power, and I think they, you know, Unilever, the CEO, would take notice for sure.
And what about customers? I mean, should we carry on going out and buying our domestos?
I personally, the trouble is I am not domestic enough to say we're not buying any more Dove, right? But however, I honestly would urge people to think about it. And this kind of audience that we have for GB News, people who are fully fired up over issues, right, they could do a little bit. And it wouldn't take very much for the Unilever board to say, are we actually doing the right thing here?
That's absolutely right, because you were saying they made 50 million euros in Russia.
They paid,
it paid 50 million in tax.
To the Russian regime.
Which that's really important, because that's genuinely supporting the Russian regime in arming itself to fight Ukraine.
And that has to stop. And I think, you know, the pressure, a bit like you've seen with the NatWest Coots fiasco, because Unilever is one of those corporates that cares very much about consumers and their choices, you'll see it move on this, because there's momentum gathering.
Well, when you say you've seen it move on it, this has been the issue for the last year, 18 months, you know. And actually, what they're still trying to. I noticed the CEO, I read it, I think, in the FT, was still trying to explain the difficulties.
Yeah.
There are no difficulties. They can just go and write it off. Their profits are so high.
They can afford to do it. The profit increase shows that they can afford to do it.
I guess, you know, just one of the lines you saw there, the Unilever CEO says that, you know, if they did sell up, you know, that the Russian government would end up making more money in one of those scenarios.
Yeah, well, 50 million isn't too bad. Anyway, I think we can say, along with thank you to my panel, that Unilever was making complete Horlicks of its reputation, another of its brands. Coming up, have the Conservatives been listening to the good people of Uxbridge?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Joan, don't Unilever make washing powder, etc.? That's a derivative of oil. More hypocrisy. And Robert, please list Unilever's main UK products so we know what to boycott. And they are, I've been told, Ben & Jerry's, Bovril, Carte d'Or, Cif, which I think used to be Jif in the old days, Coleman's mustard, I don't know mustard as it happens, Comfort, Cornetto, just the one Cornetto, give it to me, delicious ice cream from Italy, Wall's ice cream, and Domestos, which, as we know, kills all known germs. Dead. So those are the ones you can boycott if you feel like it. I'm not sure my children would be too happy if I boycott Ben & Jerry's. However, the Conservative government may finally be learning lessons from its Uxbridge by-election victory about what Tory voters' attitudes to net zero policies are. Having retained the seat by campaigning on anti-ULEZ policies, every leaflet that was delivered was about ULEZ, and I delivered a few, actually, with 2 of my children. Michael Gove has now said he wants to ease up on hitting certain net zero targets. Landlords have now been given more time to improve energy efficiency in their properties, as a delay is expected to plans forcing all rental properties to have a minimum environmental EPC rating of C. The Housing Secretary also hinted that the government should review their demands for new homes to be built with heat pumps rather than gas boilers from 2025 onwards. It also appears that the Cabinet is thinking of weakening many of the measures being implemented to help make the UK a net zero carbon emitter by 2050. At last, it seems that Rishi Sunak's government is listening to its voters and coming to the realisation that net zero pleases a fanatical and loud minority, not, however, the majority who only speak with their vote, as seen in Uxbridge. If the Conservatives will win again, they must temper this obsession with green issues and focus on what matters to voters, the cost of living, immigration and Brexit. Now, Kevin, you don't want the Tories to win the election, which is fair enough, but this issue, when you've got a cost of living crisis, and crucially, the UK on the Yale scale of this is second out of 180 countries, so we've done better than anybody else so far. We can't get too far ahead of the rest of the world, can we? We can't afford to do that.
Well, what happened in Uxbridge, and, you know, it was a very bad week for the Conservative Party. Your average results were, you know, very existential for you and many colleagues. But we're putting out some polling tomorrow. I'm going to give you an exclusive at PLMR. And only 1 in 5 Conservative voters are willing to accept higher taxes if it accelerates the achievement of net zero. 33% of Labour voters are prepared and 42% of Lib Dems. And what Uxbridge has shown, the Tories got out early with their campaign. Labour strategists recognised this, that they framed it locally. It was not a vote about, you know, I have certain views, obviously, Jacob, as you say. Is this country better after 13 years? Is the GPs better? Is the NHS better? It was all about that specific measure, and you can't win elections. You know, it's a lesson, you know, and it has made parties think. And you'll see for all of them, and it's a reminder, you know, if you're talking about a cost of living crisis and what the Tory party did on mortgage costs for millions, it's hard then to go, and by the way, ULEZ is coming and that's whatever it is, 30 quid a day.
I think Kevin's almost agreeing with me that you can't go into an election saying we're going to make your cost of living higher and your living standard worse.
And actually, if you went in and said you're going to have to spend 15,000 quid putting in a heat pump, I'm not just talking about the... By the way, if you do it for the landlords, don't even think about that. No landlord is sitting there saying, I'm spending 15,000. They're going to say to the renter, they're going to say to the tenant, I'm afraid that's going up by 200 a month. Yeah. It might be 400 a month, might be 600 a month. And so... and you're saying to ordinary people, anyway, by the way, that gas boiler, forget that, you're not going to do that. So you're going to see all the parties, and it's happening in the EU already, all the parties coming off this. And I don't know what to believe about climate change anymore. I used to be thinking it wasn't true, and now I'm less sure about it. And I think most people feel concerned, not for themselves, but for their kids.
Correct.
But nobody wants to pay the bill. Yeah. That is the issue.
Yeah, that is an issue. And, you know, let me, as I think it's good for GB News to hear, let me quote Ed Miliband, right? People are worried about the planet, but they're also worried about the end of the month and their incomes. And, you know, your trailer, Jacob, you know, you talked about net zero fanatics. Well, there are millions of Brits of all persuasions who are not fanatics, who generally think that the environment is a problem.
But I agree with that, and I think it's sensible to do what you can to be more environmentally friendly. What we've done with the internal combustion engine, so it is so much cleaner and more efficient now than it was 30 years ago.
That is the argument.
Really
we have actually halved. I heard actually a Tory activist saying, why doesn't this government boast about what's happened? We've halved the carbon issue over the last 30 odd years, and there is no publicity
for that. So as long as you can do...
Which economy? Hang on. You're on your summer break. I just need to sit... Hang on. What?
You are sitting down. It's all right. The economy has grown and our emissions have halved. Since 2010, the figures are really very strong on both of these. Though, to be fair to the emissions, some of that started with the previous Labour government. But it's about continuing that with economic growth. And the thing about ULEZ and the thing about more expensive heat pumps and so on is that that's just cost, and it's very hard to see what the benefit is.
Yeah, people can't afford it, and there is consensus, you know.
And Angela Rayner, I heard Angela Rayner saying exactly this. We've got a cost of, she says, a cost of living crisis, right? And actually what we're saying at the same time, well, the reason I say that is because what amazes me, everybody seems to be going on holiday, right? Everybody seems to be buying new cars. Everybody's going out there. Everybody's doing something at the same... Well, I'm talking about the numbers prove actually the opposite, that the crisis appears to be in putting the word into a headline.
Food banks.
But on the crisis, she said, we're saying this, but at the same time, we're saying, actually, you're going to have to spend whatever it is, £30 a day or whatever it is. They don't work, and they're not going to work at the election. I do not believe, though, that ULEZ will have an effect anywhere outside London. Even although they're planning about Manchester and everything, it's never going to happen there in the short term.
But it's the general trend. It's if you go into an election saying, we'll make your life more expensive, you will lose an election. That's the lesson, isn't it?
Well, can I ask you a question? Is it attractive to you to try and make the debate around these issues rather than looking over our shoulders at the last 13 years? Do you see more political advantage?
I think people always vote about the future rather than the past, but the past under the Conservatives is glorious, and I can go back not just over 13 years, but back to the 18th century, when it's always been better with the Tories. Thank you to my excellent panel. Kevin is off for a little while. He's on holiday, but Kelvin and I, we're continuing to work. It's the Tory work ethic. That's all from me for this evening. Up next, it's Professor Daniel Wootton. Professor, what's coming up on your programme?
Oh, another brilliant show, Jacob. Great panel. We are covering the Coots scandal, of course, from all angles, including analysis from Celia Walden of the Daily Telegraph and Jim Davidson with his riotous take. Plus, Lee Anderson is back in the house as well. Angela Levin with the royal latest, and my superstar panel, Adam Brooks, Christine Hamilton and Matthew Lazarus.
Oh, that's all going to be absolutely brilliant. That's coming after the weather. I'm back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. It's going to be raining at the Oval, but sunny in Somerset. That's the weather forecast. But you'll get more detail.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to Thursday, for most of us it's going to be fairly cloudy, some outbreaks of rain too, but if you live in central and eastern parts it will feel fairly humid. So here's the situation as we end Wednesday. Got a huge area low pressure really dominating proceedings, and weather fronts bringing in bands of rain. Some of this rain will be quite heavy and persistent as we go through the course of the night, also bringing in quite a lot of mist and fog, especially across southern parts of the country. Also quite breezy too. The far northeast of Scotland here, actually, we will stay quite dry with some clear spells. So a little bit chilly here, temperatures falling down to around 5 or 6 degrees. But for the rest of us, a much milder night than of late. Temperatures not falling much lower than 15 or 16 degrees. So we do start the day quite mild, but also quite grey, murky and damp. But as the day goes on, we should see some improvements. It may well linger, though, down towards the very far south coast of England and also across Scotland. But elsewhere, some sunshine will develop, but that may well in turn trigger a few showers. But where we do see the sunnier skies, potentially over towards East Anglia and the Wash, we could see highs reaching here around 24 or 25 degrees. But elsewhere, if you do see the rain linger, it will feel a little bit disappointing for July. Then having a look at Friday and into the weekend, the weather is set to remain unsettled, a mix of sunshine and scattered showers, and all the time for most of us, temperatures remaining around average.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know